We now come to the start of our sixth and final week of our Purpose series, and I see a number of you have got your workbooks still intact that you brought with you. We're on page 16 today, the fill-in words for today's message, and then the fill-in words on page 17 and 18 are for this final life group video this week, where the previous questions that we've been asking in those videos, we tie them together. So I personally have been very challenged as we've been going through the series. I've drawn a lot out of it myself, and I hope that you too, through the midweek videos at Life Group, have been learning more about your specific purpose. Through our devotional books, been learning about how to outwork those purposes in our lives. And then in these Sunday messages, we've been talking about the 5 major purposes that every Christ follower is called to. So we've been speaking so far. We said our purpose number 1 is Christ, to have a relationship with Him. They all had C's, by the way. Secondly, we said our purpose for every Christ follower is Christ-likeness, to become more like Him. Thirdly, we said our purpose is community. And what we meant by that is we were designed to be connected into Christian community. Fourthly, last week, Dusty spoke about we were designed for the common good. An amazing message, speaking about how we're meant to love our neighbor, and our neighbor is anybody who is in need. And our 5th purpose that we're talking about today, my purpose is the Great Commission. Our hope, my hope is that for all of us, if you're still figuring out what your unique thumbprint purpose is for your life, that at least you wake up every morning thinking and saying to yourself, my purpose is Christ, Christ-likeness, community, the common good, and the Great Commission. This is what we've been designed for. And within those 5 big purposes, we find our unique purposes. Matthew, in his gospel, talks about how Jesus first called Peter and Andrew. He finds them on a beach, these 2 brothers, fishing. And he says this to them in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 19, "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." Now, fishing wasn't their hobby, that was their vocation. That's what they did for a living. And Jesus said, I'm going to kind of retread your purpose and send you out to fish for people. In Luke's gospel, the story gets told in a little more detail. Jesus actually borrows their boat to be a little bit offshore to talk to the big crowd that had gathered. And after the message has finished and everybody's dispersing, Jesus turns to Peter, the fisherman, and he says, "Why don't you cast off and throw out your net?" Now, Peter's response gives you a little bit of an indication that maybe he thought he was the fisherman, which he was, and he didn't realize that Jesus was much more than just a rabbi and a good teacher. He had so little idea that he was speaking to the creator of the oceans, the lakes, and the fish themselves. And so he says to Jesus, "We've been fishing all night and we caught nothing, not one fish." But he says, "But nevertheless, we'll throw it." So they cast off their nets. And in that moment, fish arrive in the net in such a large way that the nets start to break. They've got to call for help to come and catch this catch of fish. And Peter, now his view has completely changed. He goes back to Jesus and he falls at his feet and he says to him this, "Go away from me, Lord." He's gone from being teacher to being Lord. "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." In this moment, Peter realizes that Jesus is far more than just a teacher. And he says, "I'm undone, my sinfulness, surely I can't be around someone like you." And Jesus replies and says this to him, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." Is that one of my children? And I was told that Levi is speaking at shift today, so they obviously got one heck of a game going there. But one of our staff guys, if you could just ask them to turn the volume down a fraction. I'm glad they're having fun though. It's like Jesus is saying to Peter, don't let your sinfulness, don't let your weakness and your shortcomings stop you from following me. In spite of those things, I'm going to give you a new purpose. Up till now, you found the adventure of fishing for fish, but I've got an even greater adventure for you, telling other people about Jesus, about me, about our relationship together. And this isn't just a message for Peter, this is a message for all of us. One of Jesus's, and we're going to talk a little later about his final words, but his final words are our first command, to go and tell others about him. And I'd like to talk today about 3 reasons why we should introduce others to Jesus, and then I'd like to finish off with a big question. So, reason number 1, Christ's salvation is too good to keep secret. Why should we introduce others to Jesus? Number one, Christ's salvation is too good to keep secret. Our key verse for the series has been Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10. We don't have it up on the screen because I'm hoping that by now most of us know it off by heart. But that verse was, we are God's handiwork created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he prepared in advance for us to do. Now, the amazing verse of verse 10 has got two amazing verses just before it, verse 8 and 9, where Paul writes this to the Ephesian church. He says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." And I want you to notice this phrase there, gift of God. Christ's rescue of me and of you, if you're a Christ follower, is a gift of God. And this gift, I want to describe it in a capital G-I-F-T. It's such an amazing and awesome gift that we'd never have the money to buy and we didn't need to earn. If we were to talk about this gift of God's rescue, we could speak for days and days from many verses in the Bible. But what I'd like to share about for a few minutes is the incredible difference this gift has made in my life personally, the felt difference it's produced in me. First of all, I have a relationship with God. Wow. You know, throughout the centuries, most of the major world religions don't teach that you can walk and talk with God. The creator of the universe is somebody that you fear. And God is worthy of all of our awe and our reverence. But when I go out in the evenings or whenever, last night I'm out just having a walk, walking and praying, talking to my Father in heaven. As the old hymn says, he walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me I am his own. It's a relationship that I have with Jesus Christ that has made all the difference in every single way in my world. Secondly, my view of all things has changed. C.S. Lewis said that when we come to know God, it's as though we see the sun rising. If you can imagine the sun coming up after a long, dark night. And not only do I see myself differently, but I see the entire world differently because of how the light falls on everything else. My relationship with Jesus hasn't just affected my world, it's affected how I see the rest of the world. My view on purpose, my view around finances, around my future, around relationships, sport, sexuality, you name it, has changed. History has changed because of the light of Christ shining down into me and on the world around me. Not only that, but thirdly, my heart has changed. That's not to say that overnight I went from having only evil desires to only ever good ones. I'm a work in progress. But the amazing thing is the longer I've walked with Christ, the more my desires have changed. I've come to have new cravings, if you like, a new sense of wanting different things. The fulfillment that comes from living for Him rather than just living for my selfish desires. Fourthly, my life's trajectory has changed. I can't even begin to imagine where I would be today if it wasn't for Christ guiding, directing, helping, and forgiving me. I'm guessing if I look at some of my weaknesses and some of my nature, because I'm quite task-oriented by nature, I'm guessing that I would have just driven hard in spite of people around me for the next thing, the next goal, chasing the next external accomplishment. I don't think my kids would have seen that much of their dad, to be honest, in my pursuit of living for me, my, and I. But Christ has changed the trajectory of my life, the community that He's put us in. I've connected with so many people in my life because of Him that I otherwise would never have met. I'm so grateful to Jesus. And fifthly, my eternal destination has changed. Jesus spoke, I read it recently, about the narrow pathway and the wide path. And He said, make every effort to enter through the narrow gate, because that's the road that leads to life, but the wide path leads to destruction. By nature, all of us want the wide path, the easy, living for me, my, and I. In this world, we've got many hundreds of decisions that we get to make, but for eternity, we only get to make one, actually, about these two pathways. I'm so grateful to Jesus Christ that because of His love and grace, I found that gate and that narrow pathway. You see, from the outside, that path looks like sacrifice and loss. But when you step onto the pathway, you realize that it's a pathway of treasure and gain in this life, but also for the one beyond. This Bible understanding about how amazing our future rescue is also contrasted in the Bible about how horrible a Christless eternity is. And we can't speak about this mandate of the Great Commission without for a minute or two thinking about hell, a Christless eternity where you get what you wanted in this life. If you wanted to know Jesus, you get that forever. Charles Spurgeon, a preacher in London 130 odd years ago, he used to say to his audience, as he was preaching on a Sunday, he says, if you want to go to a Christless eternity, you're going to have to jump over my body and go there with my arms hanging around your knees. Jesus cared infinitely more. He left the glories of heaven. And the cross of Christ is where mankind says to God, how much do you really love us? And he says, this much. And the cross functions as this giant yield sign in the path of every man and woman. Will you follow him, receiving his forgiveness, or will you reject him and have that for all eternity? Christ with his arms wrapped around us, not wanting us to go to an eternity without him. Imagine with me for a moment that you discovered that you were HIV positive. And you start to face the rest of your life having to be on a treatment and this dreadful killer disease. And you read up on the stats and you realize how many other people, especially in our country, suffer from HIV. And amazingly, in your studies and in your research, you are the one who discovers the cure. And suddenly, after you take this cure, you are no longer HIV positive. And you get a few other friends around you who suffer from the same disease. They're your test case. All of them, it cures every single one. What would you say about a person, if that was true of them, who then with the cure stuck it in their back pocket and refused to tell anybody else? Imagine that person hid behind these kinds of reasons. Well, you know, your health is a private matter. I don't want to be seen to be medically bashing anybody else. I mean, people get so offended by medical hypocrites. I don't want them to think badly of me. So I just want to, be nice and have friends. What would you say of a person who, having the cure, did nothing with it? And friends, if the message of Christ is true, then you and I have the cure for SIN disease. What would you say about people who are living their whole lives knowing that, hid behind any kind of excuse? Christ's salvation is too precious, it's too good for us to keep secret. Why should we introduce others to Christ? Secondly, Christ's compassion is too big to contain. Christ's compassion is too big to contain. People matter to Jesus and they should matter to us. If Jesus, when he was alive, you could have put a stethoscope to his heart, what would we have heard? Maybe something along these lines. Matthew 9:36, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. When you're around big crowds or you're around lots of people, do you have compassion? Or you just get irritated? Sometimes when I'm sitting at a coffee shop or in an airport, I just watch loads of strangers all around me. Every now and then I think to myself, I wonder how many of these people around me also have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Jesus, when he viewed people that were disconnected from him, he had compassion. He said they were like sheep without a shepherd, in danger of the wolf taking them out, and they were helpless and harassed. That's the spiritual condition of people who are disconnected from Christ, no matter how perfect their world seems from the outside. And immediately after this, Jesus feels this compassion. The next verse, then he said to his followers, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Hope you see the train of thinking here. It says Jesus has compassion. He says to us, you should then pray. So let's imagine we obey this command. Lord of the harvest, you commanded us, pray, please would you send out workers into your harvest field. And I'm thinking of Sandile and Zoe as I pray that, because they're such amazing people, and like, I think they do. So God, please send them out into your harvest field. Then while I'm praying that, I realize, well, wait a minute. God didn't tell me to pray about others. The reason he wants me to pray that is so that my heart changes and he taps me. He says, you're the worker that I was talking about. Well, God, where's my harvest field? Your next door neighbors, your colleagues at work, wherever you are in the world, you are on mission. You're the one I was talking about, Wimble. Whatever your surname is. In 2018, during the FIFA World Cup, the entire world got taken, captivated with the story of a junior football team much more than any of the senior ones. You might remember a group of 12, 13-year-old boys, soccer team was taken by their 25-year-old assistant coach into some underground caves in Thailand, unaware that this massive monsoon was coming in, and they were trapped in these caves with water flooding all of the tunnels that they were in. For 2 weeks, the rescuers on the outside were unable how to get to them until eventually 2 British divers decided they're going to take a chance with no knowledge of whether they were alive or not. And so they start into these tunnels. I can't imagine how horrendous that kind of job must be. Pitch black in water with your breathing equipment on. There were 3 places that they went to which were so tight and narrow they could only get through them without oxygen tanks. They had to drag them along behind them, had to take them off their backs. And they're about to give up, about 2 kilometers into these tunnels, when they pop up and they see graffiti and it looks quite fresh. And they think, we've got to continue. 2 kilometers later, 4 Ks of going through these dark tunnels, they pop up to that photo that you saw on the screen a little bit earlier. These boys were alive. Imagine their relief in that cave to see people from the outside not giving up on them yet. They were in such a complicated position that the team rescuing them grew to 100,000 people. 100 professional divers gathered there. They're trying to figure out all kinds of ways of keeping these kids alive because getting them out is so dangerous. Eventually they decide they're going to pull them out before the next rains come. And amazingly, all 13 people are rescued. Now you might, if I could say, looking at stats, right? You might say to yourself, well, losing 13 kids, people die all the time. You know, why was it so important to get them out? Which I hope you and I would have done if we were there and had the skill as well. Is because the value of every life counts. And if that is true for 12 and 13-year-old soccer teams stuck 4Ks into those caves and tunnels, how much more for people whose eternity is at stake? Christ's compassion doesn't say to you and I, just retreat back into your small, isolated world of comfort and contentment and me, my, and I. Christ's compassion is too big to contain. Christ says everybody matters, so they should matter to me. Why should I introduce others to Jesus? Thirdly, his commission is too great to disobey. You might have come across some words of great men when they die, their kind of final words you feel are pretty important because their whole life has come into focus, and these last words are recorded if you look them up, men and women. And Jesus' last words were some of his most important. In 4 of the 5 places his last words are recorded. This is what they record. Matthew 28:19, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. That's where we get the title, The Great Commission, is from that verse. Mark 16:15, go and preach the gospel to all creation. John 20, as the Father has sent me, so I'm sending you. And then in Acts 1 verse 8, you will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth. Can you see how in all that Jesus says to his followers as he goes, it's not just bunker down, look inwards. It's take this message, take the cure, take the good news to the ends of the world. As the world's population grows, the weight of this command grows. I was told recently that they estimate that there are 38 million churches in the world, which is amazing. Thank God that so many people have taken that command seriously, and there are 50,000 new churches being planted every year. But in spite of that, that's far too little to cope with the growing size of the population. There are nearly 8 billion people in the world. And another difficulty is those churches are mostly clustered in Christianized countries. And there's vast parts of the world's population where you can be born and live and die and never hear the good news presented to you by another human being. This command is too great to be taken lightly and to disobey. We need to plant more churches. We need to tell more people. We need to go. Over 2 decades ago, John Piper wrote this. He says, from time to time in the life of the church, there needs to be a wake-up call to some simple and central and basic things. One of these is Christianity is an evangelistic movement. It is persuasive and expansive and missionary. It is not coercive. It does not use the sword, manipulation, or brainwashing, but it does proclaim and persuade and plead and pray. When we lose a passion to see people won over to Jesus, we lose Jesus. Christianity is a soul-winning, outreaching, mind-persuading, heart-entreating, rescuing missionary faith, or it's not true Christianity. We need to be reminded of this because it's almost incredible how listless we can become while calling ourselves Christians. Little by little, our whole orientation can become inward. We just go about our in-house religious business like a medical clinic that sees fewer and fewer patients and has more and more staff meetings until there is nothing left but a smooth-running program for the doctors and nurses and their families. This is what happens to many churches. Let this not be true of us. And hopefully not you or me. So here's my question. What will you do with this? I'm posing the question to myself. What will you and I do with Christ's compassion, with His salvation, and with His great commission? It's possible that you hear a message like this and you think, well, gee, that guy up on stage looked pretty buzzed about all of this stuff. I'm going to pray for him, that God gives him more opportunity to speak to people. This command isn't got little tis and huckies. It's just for those people. It's for every one of us, because here's the incredible thing, is that you are in contact with some people that I'll never get into contact with. You and I live next door to people that others don't. You and I interact with people at work and through our leisure activities that others will never. Do you care enough to extend yourself to befriend others and have people around for coffee, for a meal, to extend an invitation to them to join you at something like a purpose series or an Easter service or a Good Friday service? See, here's the thing, is that people that are convinced and are urgent find a way. People that are unconvinced about this make excuses. Which will you and I be today? In his book, All In, Mark Batterson tells the account of over a century ago, a band of brave souls who were nicknamed the One-Way Missionaries, because in the years before airplane travel was a possibility, they would go out to people that had never heard about Jesus and they would just buy a one-way ticket on the ship. And they would take their own coffin with them because they knew that they would in all likelihood die out there. And they packed their belongings in the coffin instead of in a suitcase. One man named A.W. Milne went to some islands in the Pacific called the New Hebrides. Every other missionary who had been there before him had been killed by the headhunting people who lived there. And he said goodbye to everybody he ever knew and everything he had ever known, with his luggage in a coffin on the ship. Sails to the New Hebrides. And amazingly, he doesn't get killed as he arrives there. For 35 years, he becomes part of the people that he's gone to. And when he eventually dies and is buried, they put a writing above his grave, an epitaph, and they write this: when he came, there was no light. When he left, there was no darkness. You and I might not get the opportunity to do something like that. But every single day, we get the opportunity to be light, to spread the light and to tell others the amazingly good news about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.